Ladies and gentlemen, today we journey into the heart of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. An empire born from the deserts of Persia, shaped by the genius of kings, and sustained through vision, tolerance, and power. This is not just the story of battles and conquests. It is the story of how a civilization rose from humble beginnings to rule over millions, from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Mediterranean. In this powerful exploration, we'll witness the rise of Cyrus the Great, the administrative brilliance of Darius I, the harmony of cultural diversity, the thunderous clashes with the Greeks, and the empire's final, dramatic fall to Alexander the Great. But more than history, this is a reflection on leadership, unity, and the enduring legacy of a world once ruled by Persian ambition. So sit back, focus your mind, and prepare to be inspired by the timeless story of the Persian Empire, where the past still echoes in the spirit of every civilization that followed. The rise of the Achaemenid dynasty under Cyrus the Great marks one of the most pivotal and transformative chapters in ancient world history. This era saw not only the unification of the Iranian tribes, but also the birth of one of the largest and most sophisticated empires the world had ever seen up to that point. Cyrus Second, known to history as Cyrus the Great, emerged as a strategic leader, visionary reformer, and military genius who would reshape the political and cultural landscape of the Near East and beyond. Cyrus's ascent to power began in the mid-6th century BCE in the region of Anshan, part of present-day Iran. He was born into the Achaemenid family, a relatively minor branch of the larger Median and Persian tribal networks. However, from an early age, Cyrus displayed charisma and an ambition far greater than his status suggested. The first major breakthrough in his rise came when he successfully rebelled against his Median overlord King Astyages around 550 BCE. This revolt was not just a simple rebellion. It was a well-orchestrated campaign that culminated in the fall of the Median Empire. By defeating Astyages, Cyrus brought the Medes and Persians under a single rule, laying the foundation for the Achaemenid Empire. What distinguished Cyrus from many of his contemporaries was his unique approach to conquest. While many rulers of his time expanded their territories through brutal force and destruction, Cyrus followed a policy that emphasized diplomacy, religious tolerance, and administrative integration. This approach enabled him to win not just battles, but also the loyalty and admiration of the people he conquered. His conquests were swift and efficient. Lydia in the west, the Neo-Babylonian Empire in Mesopotamia, and parts of Central Asia all fell under his domain within a remarkably short period. His military campaigns were calculated and strategic, often involving alliances, intelligence gathering, and psychological tactics that overwhelmed his enemies with minimal bloodshed. One of the most defining moments of Cyrus's reign was the conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE. Unlike previous conquerors who sacked cities and enslaved populations, Cyrus entered Babylon as a liberator. The Babylonian people, disillusioned with the harsh rule of their king Nabonidus, welcomed Cyrus with open arms. He immediately set out to restore order and reinstate religious practices that had been suppressed. In his famous Cyrus Cylinder, often referred to as the first charter of human rights, he declared his respect for the customs, languages, and religions of the lands he ruled. This enlightened approach earned him a legacy of respect that transcended Persian culture and found admiration even among the Jews, who saw him as a divinely appointed savior for allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Cyrus's leadership style blended courage with compassion, strength with sensitivity, and conquest with integration. His ability to govern such a vast and culturally diverse empire came from his vision of a world order built on mutual respect rather than domination. He established satrapies, regional provinces governed by satraps, which allowed local governance to function under the overarching Achaemenid authority. This decentralized but unified administrative model enabled the empire to remain stable and prosperous for centuries. Moreover, Cyrus set the moral and political precedent for future Achaemenid rulers like Darius the Great and Xerxes. His achievements were not limited to the battlefield. They extended into the realms of governance, human rights, and empire building. He laid the groundwork for an empire that stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west, encompassing multiple ethnicities, religions, and cultures under a relatively harmonious political structure. In a world where might often overshadowed morality, Cyrus stood out as a ruler who wielded power with principle. His rise was not merely the beginning of the Achaemenid Empire, but also the dawn of a new philosophy in imperial governance, one that balanced authority with benevolence, expansion with justice. To this day, his legacy is not just etched in stone or chronicled in ancient texts, but remembered as the standard of what a great empire and a great leader could truly be. Darius I, also known as Darius the Great, was one of the most capable and visionary rulers in the history of the Persian Empire. His reign from 522 BCE to 486 BCE marked a period of extensive consolidation, organization, and development that helped transform the Achaemenid Empire from a loosely held collection of territories into one of the most efficient and administratively advanced empires the world had seen. Darius was not only a skilled warrior, but also a master strategist in the art of governance. He understood that military power alone could not sustain a vast empire. What was needed was a strong foundation of law, infrastructure, communication, and economic systems that could hold together a diverse realm stretching from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean Sea. One of Darius's most significant administrative reforms was the reorganization of the empire into satrapies or provinces. While this system had been initiated earlier by Cyrus, Darius perfected it by clearly defining the boundaries, responsibilities, and tax obligations of each satrapy. There were approximately 20 satrapies, each overseen by a satrap or governor who was responsible for collecting tribute, maintaining order, and enforcing the king's laws. However, to prevent the rise of rebellious local powers, Darius instituted a sophisticated system of checks and balances. Each satrap was monitored by royal inspectors known as the King's Eyes and Ears, who traveled the empire and reported directly to the central government. This ensured loyalty and kept corruption in check, allowing Darius to maintain control over distant regions without micromanaging them. Darius also introduced a standardized system of taxation, which replaced the old, inconsistent tribute system. This new model calculated taxes based on the wealth and productivity of each region, creating a fairer and more sustainable revenue base for the empire. The funds collected were used to support the royal court, maintain the army, and build public infrastructure. This reform not only increased the efficiency of resource collection, but also reduced the resentment that might otherwise have emerged from arbitrary or oppressive demands. In addition to administrative restructuring, Darius embarked on massive infrastructure projects that improved connectivity and strengthened the empire. Perhaps his most famous achievement in this domain was the construction of the Royal Road, a network of highways stretching over 500 kilometers from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia. This road system dramatically reduced the time it took for messengers, goods, and armies to move across the empire. Relay stations and rest houses were placed along the route, allowing couriers on horseback to deliver messages across vast distances in a matter of days. This enabled Darius to keep communication flowing rapidly between the farthest corners of his domain, reinforcing centralized authority and unity. Moreover, Darius promoted trade by standardizing weights, measures, and coinage throughout the empire. He introduced the gold daric and silver siglos as official currencies, which facilitated commerce across regional and cultural boundaries. By stabilizing the economy and reducing transaction barriers, Darius encouraged the growth of a vast and interconnected marketplace that brought prosperity to urban centers and rural communities alike. Traders, craftsmen, and farmers all benefited from this economic integration, which turned the Persian Empire into a hub of global exchange. Darius's vision also extended into architecture and urban planning. He ordered the construction of grand palaces and administrative complexes, the most notable being Persepolis. This city became a symbol of Achaemenid power, designed not only to impress visiting dignitaries, but also to function as a ceremonial capital that represented the diversity and wealth of the empire. Skilled artisans from various regions were brought in to build and decorate the palaces, resulting in a fusion of artistic styles that reflected the multicultural character of the empire. Another notable achievement of Darius was the codification of laws. He respected the traditions of various peoples within his realm, but sought to create a consistent legal framework. He commissioned local leaders to record the customs and laws of their communities, which were then harmonized with imperial law. This policy of legal pluralism allowed for both unity and respect for diversity, which helped prevent unrest and rebellion. In sum, Darius the Great's reign was defined not by relentless conquest, but by the creation of a durable and intelligent system of governance that held a massive empire together. His innovations in administration, taxation, infrastructure, and law laid the groundwork for centuries of Persian influence and stability. Where others ruled with brute force, Darius governed with structure and foresight. He turned the Achaemenid Empire into a model of imperial administration that would inspire generations of rulers from Alexander the Great to the Roman emperors. His legacy lives on as a testament to how visionary leadership can transform an empire from a fragile coalition into a thriving civilization. The Persian Empire, particularly under the Achaemenid dynasty, stands out in ancient history for its remarkable embrace of cultural diversity and religious tolerance. Unlike many empires that sought to erase or dominate the identities of conquered peoples, the Persian approach, especially under rulers like Cyrus the Great, Darius I, and their successors, was rooted in inclusivity, respect for different traditions, and the strategic value of multicultural integration. This philosophy became a central pillar of imperial policy and one of the key reasons the empire not only expanded rapidly but also sustained itself across such a vast and diverse territory for centuries. At its peak, the Persian Empire stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west, encompassing a stunning variety of ethnic groups, languages, religions, and customs. Among the people within the empire's borders were Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Lydians, Greeks, Jews, Armenians, Bactrians, and many more. The Achaemenid rulers understood that ruling over such a complex and expansive region required more than just military might. It demanded a political philosophy grounded in acceptance and cooperation. Cyrus the Great set the tone with his conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE. Rather than pillage or destroy the city, he entered peacefully and issued declarations that restored religious freedoms, most famously allowing the exiled Jewish population to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This gesture was not just a magnanimous act, it was a calculated political strategy that fostered loyalty and reduced the chance of rebellion. Cyrus's policies earned him respect not only among Persians, but also among the conquered populations, many of whom came to view him not as a foreign overlord, but as a legitimate and even divinely sanctioned ruler. This model of tolerance and inclusion was expanded under Darius the Great, Recognizing the value of cultural and religious plurality, Darius maintained the autonomy of local customs and legal systems within each satrapy or province. Rather than imposing Persian religion and culture on everyone, he allowed each group to maintain its identity while contributing to the empire's strength. Temples were rebuilt, local gods were honored, and regional languages were preserved. In Egypt, for instance, Darius styled himself as a pharaoh and supported the local priesthood. In Babylon, he respected Marduk, the chief deity, and preserved the city's religious institutions. The Achaemenids also practiced religious pluralism at the highest levels of the state. Zoroastrianism, the faith that most Persians followed, emphasized concepts such as truth, order, and cosmic balance, which resonated with imperial governance. However, it was never aggressively enforced on non-Persian subjects. Instead, the Achaemenid kings saw themselves as protectors of all the gods and faiths within their realm. This inclusiveness helped reduce religious conflict and fostered a sense of shared purpose among the empire's varied peoples. Art and architecture from the Achaemenid period reflect this cultural mosaic. The palaces of Persepolis, for example, were constructed and decorated by artisans from across the empire. The reliefs and carvings depict delegations from different regions, each dressed in their traditional attire, bringing gifts to the Persian king. These artistic works were not merely decorative, they conveyed a powerful message of unity in diversity. The empire was portrayed not as a single ethnic power, but as a coalition of peoples under one just and respected authority. The administrative structure of the empire also reflected this tolerance. Multilingual inscriptions, such as the famous Behistun inscription of Darius, were carved in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian to ensure that messages reached all corners of the empire. This use of multiple languages demonstrated not only logistical efficiency, but also respect for the linguistic heritage of various peoples. Even the imperial bureaucracy benefited from cultural diversity. Skilled administrators, scribes, and military commanders were often drawn from non-Persian populations. Merit and loyalty, rather than ethnicity alone, became the criteria for advancement in the imperial system. This meritocratic element helped build a sense of shared investment in the empire's success. The cultural and religious tolerance of the Persian Empire was revolutionary for its time and set it apart from many contemporary powers. While the Greeks often portrayed the Persians as despotic or decadent, historical evidence suggests that Persian rule was relatively humane and enlightened, especially when compared to the brutal conquest policies of other empires. The Achaemenid model allowed for the preservation of cultural identities while fostering imperial unity, proving that inclusion could be a strength, not a weakness. This legacy of tolerance had a long-lasting impact on world history. The respect for diversity demonstrated by the Persian kings influenced later empires and laid the groundwork for future notions of multicultural governance. In a time when difference often led to conflict, the Persian Empire proved that coexistence, when paired with strong leadership and administrative order, could create a powerful and enduring civilization. The conflicts between the Persian Empire and the Greek city-states, known collectively as the Greco-Persian Wars, were among the most significant military and cultural clashes in ancient history. These wars not only marked a turning point in the balance of power between East and West, but also left a lasting legacy that shaped both Persian and Greek identities. For the Persian Empire, these wars represented a bold attempt to expand westward into Europe and bring the fractious Greek world under imperial control. For the Greeks, they were a fight for survival, freedom, and the preservation of their unique way of life. At the heart of these conflicts lay a fundamental difference in political systems, cultures, and imperial ambitions, which led to a series of epic battles that would be remembered for centuries. The origins of the Greco-Persian Persian wars can be traced back to the expansion of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great and his successors. By the time Darius I came to power, the Persian Empire had already absorbed the Ionian Greek cities on the western coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. While the Persians allowed these cities a certain degree of autonomy, the Ionians resented Persian control and yearned for the freedom enjoyed by their fellow Greeks on the mainland. In 499 BCE, the Ionian revolt erupted, supported in part by Athens and Eretria. Though the revolt was ultimately crushed by the Persians, it deeply angered Darius, who saw the Greek support as a direct challenge to his authority. Determined to punish the Greek city-states and bring them under Persian rule, Darius launched the first Persian invasion of Greece in 490 BCE. The campaign began with the capture of Eretria, which was burned to the ground. Then came the legendary Battle of Marathon, where the Athenians, vastly outnumbered, defeated the Persian forces through superior tactics and intimate knowledge of the terrain. This stunning Greek victory not only halted the first invasion, but also sent a clear message the Persians were not invincible. The defeat at Marathon did not crush Persian ambition, but it did force a temporary reassessment of strategy. Darius began preparing for a much larger campaign, but his death in 486 BCE passed the responsibility to his son Xerxes I. Xerxes launched the second, much larger invasion of Greece in 480 BCE. This time, the Persian forces numbered in the hundreds of thousands and were supported by a massive naval fleet. Xerxes personally led the campaign, crossing the Hellespont with a pontoon bridge and marching his army through Thrace and Macedonia. The Greek city-states, normally rivals, formed a rare alliance led by Athens and Sparta. One of the most iconic moments of the war came at the Battle of Thermopylae, where a small force of Spartans and their allies, led by King Leonidas, held off the vastly superior Persian army for 3 days. Though the Greeks were eventually defeated, their bravery inspired all of Greece and became a symbol of resistance. Following Thermopylae, the Persian army marched into central Greece and captured Athens, burning much of the city. However, the Greek fleet, under the command of Themistocles, lured the Persian navy into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, the smaller and more maneuverable Greek ships inflicted a crushing defeat on the Persian fleet, turning the tide of the war. The following year, the Persian army suffered another major defeat at the Battle of Plataea, and the remnants of Xerxes' forces were driven out of Greece. With these defeats, the Persian Empire's ambitions in mainland Greece came to an end. Despite these setbacks, Persia remained a powerful empire, and hostilities with the Greeks would continue in various forms over the coming decades. However, the failed invasions marked a psychological and symbolic turning point. For the Greeks, especially the Athenians, victory over Persia became a source of immense pride and identity. It fueled the rise of classical Greek culture, democracy, philosophy, and the arts. For the Persians, the wars revealed the limitations of imperial expansion into Europe and the resilience of the Greek city-states. The Greco-Persian wars also had broader consequences. They led to the eventual rise of Athens as a major naval power and the formation of the Delian League, setting the stage for future internal conflicts like the Peloponnesian War. On the Persian side, the wars prompted a greater focus on the eastern parts of the empire and internal consolidation. The memory of the wars endured in Persian chronicles and influenced how future kings dealt with Western threats. Ultimately, the conflict between Persia and Greece was more than a military contest. It was a struggle between two worldviews. Persia represented empire, order, and centralized power, while the Greeks symbolized independence, civic identity, and the fragmented but vibrant nature of city-state politics. Though Persia did not fall as a result of the wars, its failure to conquer Greece marked the beginning of a long rivalry between East and West that would echo through history for centuries. The fall of the Persian Empire to Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE was a monumental event that marked the end of one of the greatest empires in human history. It was not a sudden collapse, but a culmination of internal weaknesses, external pressures, and the relentless ambition of a Macedonian king whose military genius would change the course of history. The once mighty Achaemenid Empire, built by Cyrus the Great and expanded by rulers like Darius I and Xerxes, fell to a young conqueror whose campaign was as much ideological as it was military. The defeat of Persia by Alexander signaled the end of the classical Persian order and the beginning of a new era of Hellenistic influence across the Near East. By the time Alexander came to power in 336 BCE, the Persian Empire had already begun to show signs of decay. Years of political infighting, succession disputes, and administrative corruption had weakened the central authority. Although the empire was still vast and wealthy, its ability to respond effectively to external threats had diminished. The long reigns of earlier monarchs had been followed by a series of less capable kings, and the unity that once characterized the Persian system began to unravel. Artaxerxes III had managed to briefly restore stability, but his assassination and the rise of Darius III left the empire vulnerable once more. Darius III, the last king of the Achaemenid dynasty, inherited a fractured realm. Though he attempted to assert control and prepare for Alexander's advances, he lacked the charisma, authority, and strategic brilliance of his predecessors. In contrast, Alexander, trained by Aristotle and hardened in battle under his father Philip II of Macedon, was a commander of extraordinary ambition and tactical skill. He saw the conquest of Persia not just as an opportunity for expansion, but as a mission to unite East and West under his rule and spread Hellenic culture across the known world. The campaign began in 334 BCE when Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor with a relatively small but disciplined army. At the Battle of Granicus, he won his first major victory against a Persian satrap-led force. From there, he moved quickly through Asia Minor, liberating Greek cities and presenting himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror. His approach won him both military success and popular support. In 333 BCE, he met Darius III for the first time at the Battle of Issus. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Alexander's tactical brilliance and the disorganization of the Persian forces led to another decisive Macedonian victory. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family and royal treasure, a moment that shattered Persian morale and undermined Darius's legitimacy. Alexander continued his campaign by moving south, securing the eastern Mediterranean coast and taking Egypt without resistance. He was crowned pharaoh and founded the city of Alexandria, a future center of learning and culture. With his rear secured, Alexander turned back east to confront Darius one final time. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE near modern-day Iraq. Darius assembled a massive army, including war elephants and chariots, but the superior tactics and discipline of Alexander's forces again proved decisive. Darius fled once more, and this time his authority collapsed completely. After Gaugamela, the road to the Persian heartland lay open. Alexander marched into Babylon, Susa, and eventually Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the empire. There, he seized immense wealth and symbolically burned the royal palace, an act interpreted by some as revenge for the Persian burning of Athens during the Greco-Persian Wars. More than just an act of destruction, it was a clear message: the Achaemenid dynasty was no more, and a new power now ruled Asia. Darius III was later betrayed and killed by his own satraps while fleeing deeper into the empire. Alexander, upon finding his body, expressed anger at not being able to defeat Darius in person and had him buried with full honors as a fellow king. With Darius's death, Alexander declared himself the rightful heir to the Achaemenid throne and began to adopt Persian customs and dress in an effort to unite his new subjects. He married Persian nobles, encouraged intermarriage between his soldiers and local women, and incorporated Persian officials into his administration. The fall of the Persian Empire was not just a military defeat, it was a transformation of the ancient world. The vast bureaucratic machinery, cultural richness, and imperial traditions of Persia did not vanish overnight. Instead, they were absorbed into the new Hellenistic world Alexander was building. While the Achaemenid dynasty had ended, many aspects of Persian governance, art, and influence lived on under Alexander and his successors. In the end, the fall of the Persian Empire was the result of both internal weaknesses and the unmatched drive of Alexander the Great. The empire that had once ruled from the Nile to the Indus was brought down not by a massive rebellion or economic collapse, but by a single man whose vision, military skill, and timing aligned perfectly with the vulnerabilities of his greatest rival. It was the end of one world and the beginning of another. The history of the Persian Empire is a grand saga of visionary leadership, cultural richness, and imperial innovation. From the revolutionary rise of Cyrus the Great to the methodical reforms of Darius. From the empire's respect for diversity to its dramatic clashes with Greece, and ultimately its fall to Alexander the Great, each chapter reveals the complexity and brilliance of one of history's greatest civilizations. The Persian Empire was not just defined by the extent of its conquests, but by the ideas it stood for: unity in diversity, tolerance in governance, and structure in administration. Though the Achaemenid dynasty fell, its legacy endured, influencing empires for centuries to come. The Persian Empire remains a powerful symbol of how wisdom, vision, and adaptability can build a civilization that echoes far beyond its time.